we talk a lot about responses to trauma, and part of that is because, the obvious ones, the fight or flight, like those are sort of socially acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not going to let that happen. I was proactive, but the freeze, fawn, mm-hmm. Some of the more passive responses are really confusing. Mm-hmm. And if people don't know about the fact that those are normal ways to respond to traumatic events, it can feel like, well, I let that happen. Mm-hmm.
I'll kick it off introducing Cindy. Cindy, the audience should know by now, is a comic storyteller, educational speaker, innkeeper, mother, and author of several books, including Sexploitation and Sex, College, and Social Media. We're really excited to have you here. And Jamie is the co-founder and CEO of Learning Courage, an organization he created to help schools respond to sexual misconduct with survivor-centered practices that rebuild trust and promote healing. So there's a lot more behind your stories than those short bios. Anything else you want to add to that before we dive into questions, other context, other things you're working on?
Just for context, in terms of my work, I got into this work because of my own experience as a survivor of sexual abuse. I was abused by a male teacher when I was a freshman in high school at Milton Academy. And it was the experience of course, living through that and carrying that with me through life, but also the reconnecting with the school in 2016 when I received a letter from the school asking anyone who had been sexually abused during their time at the school to share that information. And it was that experience that made me realize that I had something useful to offer schools. And that really motivated me. Part of what actually motivated me to even go to the school and retell my story was the opportunity to use my lived experience to help others. And so that's really what motivates me today.
Yeah, thank you for sharing. And I think it's a really powerful way to see, like, that strength is so clear, where it's this, I have this experience and I am in a position where I can share and educate. That is so palpable for listeners of like, wow, that's really strong. And I can feel that and learn from that. So that's a really cool experience.
Well, and it was empowering realizing that instead of feeling victimized or re-victimized by telling the story, I realized, oh, actually, I have something to offer. And so that, again, was just like a powerful moment, mm-hmm. and it continues to motivate me.
Awesome.
Yeah.
What motivates you, Cindy?
I stumbled into this. I had a comedy show, which I kind of got bossed into doing. I was a little busy with 3 little kids. But what really made me realize this work was necessary, I was asked to speak in a fraternity and a sorority. And I was alarmed by the lack of knowledge of college, their lack of understanding of sexual, basic sexual things. They could recite, the definition of consent, but applying it in a context where needed was an issue. And I think particularly I realized with the group of men I spoke to, I spoke for an hour and took questions for 2 hours. That made me realize the internet is actually not helping, and the amount of erectile dysfunction, the concerns about feeling sexually adequate, sexually relevant, all of those things became apparent. So that motivated me to start educating young people. And that went to high school and now to parents, really, to proactively give sexuality education. So I perform my comedy shows, which have some serious messages, and I also give serious talks that have some humor to help that medicine go down.
Awesome. And so where do you see your work in sex education? How do you two know each other? How does your work maybe overlap in some ways? give us the context of you two.
Did Barb introduce us?
She did.
Barb
Yeah, we have a
McLeod,
mutual friend.
friend, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Or two mutual friends, actually,
Yeah.
a brother and sister,
Yeah.
who are dear friends for both of us.
Yeah.
And I think that was the original introduction. And then, that was back in your comedy days.
Yeah, yeah.
And so, I was introduced to Cindy when she was on stage, essentially.
Oh, cool.
And also then I went to see you at Phillips Exeter.
Right.
Talking to kids.
That's right.
And that was relatively new in my work. So I was like, oh, this woman, she knows what she's talking about. She's really engaging kids in a way that I haven't seen before. So we've just stayed in touch.
Yeah. And the masculinity piece, Jamie, the pressures around masculinity and male friendship and vulnerability, all of the things we're talking about. Back then, I remember we had a couple conversations and about, and I'm a woman talking to young men about that kind of thing. And we had a few conversations that really digging into that and seeing we were just aligned on a lot of things.
For sure.
Yeah. Yeah.
And we both live in New Hampshire. So we got that going for us.
Yeah.
Nice. Well, that's helpful framing. And like a big common thread is schools as an organization. So tell me, how does that make it different? The audience, how do you connect? How do you share? How do you make an impact in delivering communications to not just a student one-on-one, but like a body of students who are hearing what you're saying?
So the part of the challenge is getting the adults comfortable with the conversation and recognizing that conversation is actually is the antidote to the issues. And so getting the right people in the room and allowing them to feel uncomfortable and just realizing that the conversation is what kids want too. I can't tell you the number of times we've had conversations with kids who tell us they feel like the adults don't trust them to have conversations that they're really interested in having. And so a lot of it is really just overcoming the fear that adults have, and educating the adults in the process.
What's the fear? Is the fear like if my kids receive this kind of sex education, they're more likely to engage in behaviors that I don't want them to? I don't think they're old enough, ready? Like, what kind of pushback or fears?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of things. There are rules in most schools about having sexual intercourse. It's not allowed. And so teaching sex ed feels like in some ways it's encouraging what is not allowed. And so there's that component. And then there's also the questions or concerns that they have about the parents, the blowback they would get from parents who are uncomfortable. Wait a second, you taught my kid what? Like, that's my job, or I'm just not comfortable with you talking with them at all about that. And that's, parents' discomfort. And it's the adults involved who are often just uncomfortable with the conversation and what it might create for them in terms of their own discomfort and what kind of messages we might be giving to kids.
And wouldn't you say, Jamie, for the sexual abuse and the sexual assault on campuses, that there's some of the administration is, when we have these conversations, when I go and speak in school and you do, kids tend to come forward. They want to step forward and talk about a situation. So therefore
their
it
own
creates,
disclosures.
Yes. So it creates issues for the school that while they want to support kids, there is this hesitation and concern about
absolutely
all of that legal.
And that's an important part of what we do, is making sure there's appropriate scaffolding so that if kids do disclose, that we know where to send them. And first of all, we always say in our work with kids, this is not a moment to disclose.
Right.
That if you have something to share, that's really important. And here's these are the folks you really should be talking to.
Gotcha. And I remember in a conversation with Cindy, we talked about those barriers to getting into the right room to share this kind of education. Why is it important to break through those barriers? Why is it important to not just leave it at maybe the school default? Where does the default lack, and where do you hope to fill that gap?
Well, I'll talk about sexuality education. I'm not giving the biological sexuality education. There are schools I go to have incredible health programs, and I'm just a person who comes in and kind of puts it in stereo for the students and the staff. And in some schools, they do no sexuality education, and they're counting what I say as their sexuality education, where I think kids get the biological part, should have that between the ages of 5 and 7. And that's something that's been recommended by sexuality educators and doctors, pediatricians who understand the issues with the internet, the issues with sexual assault and sexual abuse, the proactive sexuality education. So, but my part is talking about the influence of internet porn, how AI, how social media is making kids pull back. But the barriers, I think sometimes it's easier to have an outside person come in and speak than it is to have someone on the staff that, so sometimes it's kind of a, let's get this in here. Yeah. And they send a letter to parents and warn them. And in some cases, and sometimes they said, this is what we do here at our school. So we're going to have these kids, and they're willing to deal with any blowback.
That's helpful.
I would say there are two main barriers. One is time. In independent schools, everyone is overprogrammed. And so finding time in the curriculum or even outside of the curriculum is just really challenging. And you combine that with fear, which I alluded to a little bit, the fear of, oh my gosh, what kind of message are we sending to the kids? What kind of blowback might we be getting from parents? I'm personally uncomfortable with this topic, so I would rather avoid it. I don't have the tools. All of those things are barriers. And that's part of what we try to do is like give them the tools and help them practice. So both the adults and the kids feel more comfortable.
I would add to that, I believe strongly, having done this for over 20 years in schools, in all different kinds of schools, kids who get, they're carrying the weight of so much pressure around their athletics, their music, their performance, their academics, and getting into college, which now is starting. That process for parents is starting in 9th grade, and they're already on the grind. But I believe that they're carrying a lot of weight around, I'm feeling sexually inadequate, sexually irrelevant, very nervous about all of it for all the cultural messaging and online messaging and constant awareness and comparison. And that by taking the time, if a school takes the time and does this work, that actually that is it's like taking one burden off them. When they're informed and they have accurate information, they feel better, and it's worth it. They're going to excel more in all of those other areas if they could relieve this kind of burden and the pressure.
Yeah,
for sure.
And so much of what you do in your conversations is normalize a lot of the feelings and thoughts that they're probably having around fear or imperfections. Yeah. And when you're only seeing these glossy, confident, or AI images
Yes.
online, your realities in, I don't know, messy high school relationships or social realities are going to be very different. And it's a ton of pressure to add in addition to all the other academic, athletic pressures that they
Right.
feel. So it makes perfect sense how it kind of pops the balloon of like anxiety, pressure. I want to switch gears a little bit. I think that the school context is really helpful with a focus especially on young boys. Where does the pressures of performing to fit into masculine norms add additional challenges to thinking about this work? Cindy, let's start with you just on feeling comfortable in sexuality and sexual arenas.
I would say it is, the questions I'm getting reflect that it's worse than ever. I think when people say to me, oh, people are waiting to have sex, isn't this what you are hoping for? And of course, we want people to choose carefully, take their time, not aim for numbers, and instead focus on more connected relationships. But the reason why people are not engaging in sexual relationships is because they're scared. They've got genital image issues, body image issues, sexual prowess. I mean, I start my talks these days by saying, look, there's one thing I know about everyone in this audience. You hope to feel sexually adequate, and you want to be good at sex. And right out of the blocks, I want to tell you, there is no good at sex. Any human, any age, any gender identity, any sexual orientation can have awesome, satisfying sex with a partner with these criteria of, a balance of interest, both people leaving with dignity. Thank you, Shafia Zaloom. She's a great sexuality educator, the best. Communication, vulnerability, and, just how important that is. And I just start out and I say, the problem is you are trying to educate yourself in a private place. So you're looking things up. The algorithms have got you sent right to porn. Maybe I'm not supposed to say that word on here, but adult content, and of all kinds. And so that's safer. There's no emotional risk. There's no putting yourself for public shame. And I cannot believe what I'm hearing on colleges' campuses more than ever, how fearful young people are to put themselves out there to ask someone out, and that they just say it's too risky because the way everyone tells their friends about their bodies, how they are sexually, how they're obsessed, how they're too into them. So just it's such a dicey dance of hooking up and waiting till it feels all right. So it's the avoidance of the avoidance. And Scott Galloway's work is really great. He has a new book that came out. He's up at Stern School. But just, and Better Boys, Better Men, you had him on here. We've got all these great people. Niobe Way. I mean, those, their work really is right on target of what I'm seeing in the trenches when I speak to young people who are just trying to socially survive and are nervous.
Yeah, and I would underscore all of that. I think some additional things are, so much has changed since I was a teen, and yet so much has also remained the same. Like, if I had known that everyone else was terrified of like how they presented and, trying to get it right, I think I would have been much more at ease more at ease anyway. And so there's the fear of like how you present yourself. And then also at a time when identity is forming, and like there are and to layer on top of that in terms of change, social media, which is like inescapable. Like kids just can't get away from it. And so those messages that, at least in the days that I grew up in the 80s, we didn't have social media. And so we lived in a much more analog world. We had lots of conversations, but we weren't like every time we pulled our device out of our pocket, just absolutely like hammered about what you should be and how you may be inadequate. So I feel for kids growing up in today's world.
Mm-hmm. For sexual assault or abuse, misconduct, what does the layer of masculine norms add to that as an additional barrier? How do you communicate to young men that it's okay to share, or begin the process of healing or growth or being okay after an experience with misconduct? What are those layers like, and what is the way to work past them?
I think part of it is education, certainly. And, from my experience, the power of friendships were absolutely critical in my own, interrupting the abuse, and also just feeling like I had some people I trusted that I could go to. So I think a lot of it is normalizing the behavior and understanding what your resources are. In my case, the resources were not professionalized. They were like your buddies or, your crew. And so I would say those are sort of the key things. It's hard for kids, for anyone really, to be vulnerable. And that, there's so much shame and fear, particularly around sex and sexuality, and when things go wrong, that like making sure you have the vocabulary and the people who you feel okay talking to, and knowing that it's okay. To me, those are some of the biggest challenges.
Go ahead.
There you go.
Last night, we at this film, Magic and Monsters, directed by Nora Shapiro, incredible film
Really
that's
good.
just come out about a performing arts school in Minneapolis, and that had sexual abuse scandals that for years. And one thing that Bridget from the Packard School, she was on the panel, and she talked about, she has a very boundary focused health program starting K through 12, and they are really active, and she says it's easy to replicate. She is really doing incredible work. And one of the things she said, which I always talk about to young people, but I'm reaching them at the earliest in middle school, about following their inner compass, listening to their gut, like their enteric nervous system, that to get that. But she starts in kindergarten actively teaching young people about listening to their intuition. For instance, she'll say to the kindergarten, when you hear an alarm, when you hear the ambulance alarm, what are you feeling? Kids share that, and taking them through that process. Once again, time taking to address that. Brooklyn Rainey wrote a book called One Trusted Adult. I think that is really an important, I think when you talk to kids who get through hard things, they often refer to, even if in their family they don't have that, a teacher, a coach, a person who was a trusted person. But among boys, so here I am, a woman who looks like their mom, practically their grandmother for some of them, and I come in and I speak. And what I know about girls and young women, even if they don't report to the police or go through a process with a lawyer, if they don't do that process, they often tell their mother, tell their sister, tell a friend. It's talked about among women, even from our time in the 80s. That's always been the case. From the time I was 12, playing baseball with boys, the only girl on the team, and my natural repellents assuring that I will not be dating them, so I was kind of their trusted sister, told me everything. Ski racing, so 10 months a year I'm immersed in boy world. And I will say this, I hold that secret of sexual abuse or a creepy older guy or a creepy older brother of many of the young men I know who tell no one, do not tell their parents. And when I go around to speak, since I met Jamie, I started being more actively talking about it, especially at an all-boys school. And you can hear a pin drop when I talk about how many young men come up to me after I speak, share their story over the years and in my work. And how they've told no one. And of course, sometimes they're telling me they're heading off to class. I'm saying, talk to a counselor, trying to connect them. But they haven't told anyone. And I think that's the most heartbreaking thing, is that they carry that for years, and it impacts them in so many ways. And feeling, another confusing thing is when boys, I got an erection, I got off, so I must have liked it. So that's very confusing to boys. And that's for women too. Some women have never had an orgasm, because female orgasms are hard to have, whole other topic. But some women have had partners, great partners who care, never had an orgasm, and then sexually assaulted, have an orgasm, because they're resisting, they're clutching, like it's a physical response to being sexually assaulted can trigger a clitoral orgasm. And so how confusing is that?
Right.
And that's so rarely talked about. So
I feel like there's a comedy show in there somewhere.
A few.
Cindy actually has a whole show on, what was it called?
Finding the Doorbell.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and I think it's helpful to hear the layers. It's and the context around it is so important, and I think that especially for the act of sharing, conversations are so helpful to normalize. And like so many of the things we talk about on Under the Hood Talk, it really is about the conversations, sharing, and not holding everything in as a way to move forward. Because the sharing brings in other people. It brings in the support. It brings out other sharing, and it kind of defeats the feeling of aloneness.
Totally. That
is super suffocating, where I'm the only one who has to deal with this. I'm the only one who feels this, and that weight is so heavy. So heavy. And so I think seeing someone on a stage modeling a really hard conversation is such a clear wedge through that. And I think that's why it inspires kind of maybe even frantic or impulsive disclosures, like, oh my God, I can say this. Like, I see someone talking about this who has good intentions and wants to help, and there's no ulterior motives, and it's not the school's reputation, or it's just talking about something challenging, and allowing those topics to just kind of hang in the air and let someone grab it.
Yeah, I mean, I see it so often in schools when we talk about it, particularly with kids, and there's almost this, a rapt sense of attention, like you can hear a pin drop. And sometimes I mistake, the look of concern and like really deep thought that I see in the audience for disengagement or something other than what it is. Because oftentimes they don't have outlets for that conversation. And as you say, like just modeling that, seeing someone else whose life hasn't crumbled as a result of sharing, like, is incredibly powerful. And, again, there's so much wrapped up in the fear, the shame, the blame, the concern about what people will think of me. And those are all real and very powerful. And so, like, just even identifying that for kids is really, really important and valuable. And then saying, well, and here's what happened to me, and here's what it did in my life, and also helping them understand, like, intervention is really a great way to prevent this from taking hold of your life monopolizing, 20% of your brain space. Early intervention, we know minimizes harm or, prevents further harm.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not easy, right? Just being able to encourage people to like take that step. And if the scaffolding isn't there, if they don't have friends, they don't trust someone, then what do they do?
I think that pin drop is the thing. Like I can have a 300 all-boys school, 300 boys, and my topics make them nervous, right? And it's an old lady talking about them pretty comfortably, and they're squirrely. There's always a few little, and I'm just used to that. And sometimes I'm like the mean first grade teacher, like, gonna get your teacher to come in and sit next to you. And they try to calm down, but they're trying to, they're just nervous. And I understand there's a certain amount I allow. So throughout the thing, there's giggles and squiggles going on. When I address this, necks are craned. They're sitting up in their seats, heads turned sideways. It is stunning to me how for that section, because I think it's so common for boys and men to have experienced that.
Yeah. And I think even if, I'm not even going to say it's not directly relevant to everyone, because it is directly relevant to everyone. I think the fact that it's also taboo makes it a rare resource. And so everyone's like, whoa, like this doesn't happen very often. Like this is rare. It's
right.
valuable. And I think that is felt. I think the other thing that's important is that I don't think anyone can react correctly in vulnerable positions. And that, I think, also in turn generates shame, regret of, I should have done this, I should have done that. And you can only react correctly or appropriately, healthfully after, when you're not in a state of fear, panic. And I think that's what a forum of a conversation, when everyone's safe, they're sitting in an audience or learning about a resource or a channel or counselor, like that's when you can actually act and do something. But I know that in positions of vulnerability, your mind is not, oh, this is happening and this is my boundary and this is where it got crossed and this is what I'm going to do next and this is how I'm going to stop it. Like, no, it doesn't. But I think that the self-critical voice can add layers of, I should have done that, I should have done that. Obviously hindsight's 2020.
Right.
But giving some grace to like this, it's not a situation. It's like asking someone to do calculus in a car crash. It's like,
right.
You're
right.
not, you can't.
Good
you can
analogy.
You can think about it, and with help and resources, like, can take the right steps. But there's those situations in life that are not, you kind of have to give your grace to just reacting. When you're reacting instinctually, defensively, fighting, however it comes across as like that's how it happened, and being okay with that. And I know that's a really hard process, and it takes some like after thinking and after connection with people who know what they're talking about and give you language and frameworks to deal with.
So important. I mean, we talk a lot about responses to trauma. And part of that is because, the obvious ones, the fight or flight, like those are sort of socially acceptable, right? Mm-hmm. Like, I'm not going to let that happen. I was proactive. But the freeze, fawn, mm-hmm. Some of the more passive responses are really confusing. Mm-hmm. And if people don't know about the fact that those are normal ways to respond to traumatic events, it can feel like, well, I let that happen. Mm-hmm. And that certainly happened with me. My trauma response was freeze and fawn. And so I was like, plus, I had this physical response that I was, to Cindy's point, like, well, wait a second, my body responded in a way that was really confusing. And I felt like betrayed by my body because, I became aroused in a situation that was like I had never fantasized about, I had never thought about it. And I was like, it made me not trust even like, parts of my identity that I had like was really sort of in the early stages of solidifying.
Yeah. And I think I agree the passive response, especially the freeze response, outside looking in, when someone's not in a fierce place, it's like, oh, how could you just froze? Yeah. But it's easy to see like, after, when you're not afraid, oh, I wish I'd thrown a punch or ran away.
Right.
But it's
that's that masculinity, that
the acceptable response.
Like, that's not a manly response.
Right.
Yeah.
Freezing? Are you kidding me? Like,
but
that's kind of
very
wimpy.
common.
And it's very common.
Yeah. And it's also like, it's an immediate, the reason, or the way I think of it as like a defensive response, even though it's not like an active like punch or running away, is that it's an immediate denial of what's happening, because it's not addressing what's happening in the moment. So it's like a brain not wanting to acknowledge or recognize or like accept what's happening. It's a freeze.
Right.
It's a like that this isn't happening, and I'm just not dealing with it right now.
Just complete dissociation and like
self-preservation.
I'm not in the room.
Yeah. So I think the more, and every situation is different, but I think having the conversation around the different responses and feelings can kind of unblock like being okay with yourself after. And I think that's really the most important part for overcoming like really hard situations is being okay with yourself and how you responded. And I think giving different outlets for like how responding to basically impossible situations, giving grace for that, because it truly is, it's impossible situations.
And from my standpoint, I and that's why I talk about friendship so much, because like I didn't know how to save myself. And if it weren't for one friend in particular, Doug, who's still a very close friend, if it weren't for him advocating for me, seeing that I was suffering and saying to me, do you mind if I tell my mom what happened? Because I wasn't able to. In fact, I wasn't even able to tell him the scale and scope of what was happening to me. But he knew enough to see that I was suffering, and he acted on my behalf. And so, everyone needs a Doug in their life. And that's really hard, right? Because it does require vulnerability. It requires, time and attention and care, and finding those right people, or the people that you feel comfortable with. And, and because we're always distracted by, these devices in our pocket, that gets in the way of developing those friendships too, those analog relationships. So anyway, I just want to put a plug in for friendships, because I just feel like, for me, they saved me, literally. I think saved my life. And plus they're incredibly, amazing to have lifelong friends and people you can trust.
And didn't Doug, he saw you through, he helped nudge you to come forward when the letter came out.
Totally.
And through the process of bringing that, the person.
I mean, he's been an amazing advocate in my life. And so to Cindy's point, I mentioned this letter that I received from Milton, and he called me the day the day we got the letter, and he's like, "Do you think it's time to tell your story?" And I was like, "Hell no! Like, why would I do that? Why would I put myself back in that position?" And he took that and was just like, "All right, well, just think about it." And he also, when the first time I was abused, I was actually on a bike trip in Italy, and he was with me, and this was what I actually felt proud of myself about. Was that I pulled him aside along with another childhood friend who was also on the trip and just said, "Hey guys, like, this totally freaked me out. This happened last night." And Doug said, "Well, I'm going to go talk to the trip leader who was the guy who abused me." And I was like, "Are you kidding me? Like, you can't do that." And he's like, No, I'm going to. And so that's the kind of friend he is, and has always been in my life. And so not everyone's lucky enough to have someone that proactive and insightful and thoughtful. But to look for people like that is,
or train people to
and
be
train
Dougs.
people,
And that's the social courage
right.
training.
Look out, have your antenna up. Like, how are my friends doing? Are they okay?
Yeah.
And if not, like, where do you go with that?
I mean, it seems like that is a big part of all the groups addressing masculinity and friendship and male loneliness. A big piece is, even coaches in the NFL are saying, you got to check in to make sure your friends are okay. Like, pay attention, as you said, the antenna. But that's also a vulnerable thing. And, I hear parents still today say, "Oh, I'm so glad I have boys. They're so uncomplicated." I say, I'm sorry. That's very convenient that our society keeps boys repressed emotionally, because then you can not have to engage. And when your child reaches 25, 26, the quarter century crisis, and things start coming up for them, and they're struggling with mental health, they're struggling with relationships, they're out of your house and they're out of your hair. But when it all comes down and they crumble, it's back with you. And girls are so dramatic and they're so emotional. Well, society allows that. We're allowed to have a full range of emotions. So I think another piece of this is raising our boys, encouraging, helping them name. I mean, it's interesting having a drift. Who is his name? Michael Thompson. All right.
Oh, yeah.
So Michael Thompson, years ago in the 1990s, back in the 1900s, he wrote a book that is so applicable today, that we need to educate boys to understand their emotions, to help them name those emotions, and how investing in that will pay off in their connections with other people. So, what was the name of that book? Why am I've read it 3 times.
Yeah, I can't remember, but he's... is he still?
He's
still doing work.
I think he's still doing. He's not working full time, but he's still writing. Oh, it's such a good book. Just give me a second. We've got to edit this out.
We can link it in the after.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay,
Perfect.
wait. I got to pull that up. Yeah.
Okay, where do I want to go next? I think, there's the accessing the emotional range is really important for men to put names to the feelings that they feel and gather acceptance. And maybe this is outside the wheelhouse, but I'm curious on the other side in terms of a culture, we talk about college campuses or a culture of assault and misconduct, or mixing in alcohol and environments where assault and misconduct can happen. Where does the sex education not just help victims but prevent misconduct and assaults from perpetrators? Is there a mechanism there, or is that not a mechanism where the sex education can be a prevention for potential perpetrators in the future?
I mean, you work more in higher ed than I do, so I'm curious to hear your perspective.
I would just say, first of all, it has been known for a long time. Young people who get comprehensive sexuality education consent training, porn education. We'll just say, let's start with the sexuality education. Those kids have sex later. They have more consensual, enjoyable sex. All those things that we want. The Dutch have an aggressive sexuality education where they're talking about pleasure with kindergarten. They start in kindergarten and they normalize it and they get kids used to it. America would have the hardest time pulling this off, with even more so now. But they have all the things we want. Older age of average time of first sexual experiences, less unwanted pregnancy, consent so well understood by young people. Hearing young men in interviews that I've seen with these kids, they said, who would force a girl to have sex? Like, who would do that? Like, this is like so creepy. Just unbelievable. Now, of course, it's not across the board and it's not perfect, but all the things we say we want are happening when there's proactive sexuality education. Right. Pretty clear. So I think that's very basic. I think kids, when, kids still get to college and consent, they can recite it, of course, but Saturday night under the influence of alcohol, under the influence of drugs, under the influence of optimistic arousal, you cannot apply that understanding. Even though you can recite the meaning of consent, you're so hopeful, you've told your friends you might be hooking up, you really are excited, you want to make this happen. So it makes decisions go differently for people, both of all genders, who decide either I'm going to push here because I think this, even though this person's intoxicated, feels like we had a yes earlier, they justify in their head, or I'm not that comfortable with this, but I'm going to allow my boundaries to be, it's fogged through all of the, under the influence. I see young people in the leaders in fraternities and sororities desperately trying to convince, there's a few kids who are pushing boundaries or allowing their boundaries to be pushed, and they're trying to intervene, but it's such an uphill battle for them. It just, things go amok in a party because people basically say, I'm drinking, and I can just say I was drinking and I'm being creepy. One thing that bugs women on campus is how young men will be posting things about sexual assault and supporting of really kind of righteous on social media. Then they see them at a party and they're fully creepy. And when they address it and call them out, like, oh, I was just drinking. I must have. And they use that as an excuse. So, yeah, the lines get blurry still. And I think people are afraid to have sex because they don't trust that they'll be accused. There's panic about that as well. It's still a tricky. I can't believe the questions that come up now. How, particularly in men, I sometimes do a fraternity and a sorority together. Sometimes it's on Zoom, and I say to them, "Look, sometimes people ask questions just to see what I'll say, or they're, as a dare." I said, don't bother. Nothing's going to faze me. Just let's ask the questions you need. And the number of questions about penis size and penis adequacy, it used to be something they emailed later, asked privately after my talk, or in just a male group. Now there doesn't matter who's in the audience. They're raising their hand. I'm really nervous about this. I just panicked. And I've already answered all of it, like all the penises work. Like, it doesn't help that the average size penis in porn is 8 inches and the average fully erect adult penis is 5.14 inches. And that alone, they're up high five seniors in high school, college. And so just feeling inadequate is really plaguing all genders at this point.
Yeah, that certainly rings true in my experience. And it's just a quick story that I think brings it to life. I was in a school, this was actually a couple of years ago, and we gathered boys in a dorm, and they were freshman to senior. There were about 20 of them. And we asked the question, like, can you talk about consent and what that means? And of course, they could all, to your point, they can all tell you what the definition of consent is. But when, then we started playing out scenarios and getting them to talk about, like, is this consensual sex? And they started coaching each other and asking questions. The more experienced kids were like, this is consent or this is not. And it was fascinating. We just were able to step back and listen to these kids. And what was, fascinating, not surprising to me, but 6 months later, we heard from the dean of students at the school. He had asked kids, halfway into the year, like, what's been your most impactful experience so far in this year? Totally wide open question, could have been anything. And several of them said that conversation about consent was their most impactful thing the whole year.
And those are high school kids?
And these are high school kids.
What was it, senior, junior, seniors, or all ages?
It was freshman through senior.
Oh, it was all of them in there.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Incredible, right?
Incredible. It should happen.
Right? They all needed that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I think, the real life learnings that can be taken from that kind of discourse in a school is really powerful and super rare. So I'm not surprised that there was some fingers pointed that was the most important thing that I learned this year, because that's going to stick out more than the AP Euro study guide.
Totally.
And just having more of those conversations, more of those resources where you're learning about things that are really useful for your life. You're doing it with friends and peers, like that kind of group learning.
Right.
Really socially reinforces that learning, where I think everyone, the little edge of fear and anxiety actually like heightens the focus of, oh, this is like a little nerve-wracking for me, and it heightens the focus and really reinforces the learning, and the group learning of like, oh, we're all kind of figuring this out together is really powerful.
Totally.
Really powerful. So I guess zooming out, like at scale, like how do you encourage that beyond us? Like, are there certain things schools can do at scale, or policy wise, or class wise, course wise, to encourage those kind of learnings where you can't be everywhere at once?
Yeah, I mean, we always encourage schools to have if we're in a secondary school, like 4-year curriculum for social emotional learning. And so it's not all about sex,
Yeah,
but
right,
and it's
but
age appropriate. But and you have to have the right teachers who are comfortable really getting into the weeds, and giving the student leaders. We talk a lot about upstander intervention. Giving the student leaders the recognizing that, like, they are the ones who are setting the tone in the school, and so it's really up to them. We're enabling them to sort of say, like, look, you guys are here to keep each other safe. Like, none of the kids want to hurt someone else, and they don't have, if they don't have the information, they don't have the resources and tools to stay safe themselves and to prevent harm. They make mistakes, and from my standpoint, that's shame on us. That's shame on the adults. So I do think, and it goes back to time and fear from the adult standpoint. So that's the challenge. I would say one thing that is really positive, out of the mental health crisis that we're experiencing today, particularly in adolescence, is that there is so much written about the mental health crisis that and sexual misconduct is actually being folded into wellness curriculum. And so it is also, that diffuses it. If schools are creating wellness centers and dedicating more time and energy and resources, it's easier for them to say, all right, so we know, that if kids are spending a lot of time and energy thinking about this, if we can address that, they're going to be better able to listen to, understand chemistry and history and algebra and all those things.
Yeah, and when the only content or communications on these topics are in like formal letters wrapped in legalese in a reactive state to some scandal, there's nothing productive.
Right.
It's all fear, it's all guarded, and it's just not productive at all when it comes in wrapped in some I don't know, NDA disclosure, whatever, legalese. That's not actually for the kids.
Right.
That's like damage control for the adults.
Totally. Yeah.
So I think I think that is bringing it into wellness, like as a more holistic social emotional learning for the kids. I hope to see that wave continue.
Me too.
And last night at this Hidden Waters, this organization, this nonprofit that helps those who have harmed, those who have been sexually abused, so the people who have been harmed, people who have harmed, and the people around them who can make a difference and who feel powerless. Really incredible organization. And hearing Bridget from the Packard School, and I'm hearing in public schools around the country and private schools, independent schools, that having teachers actively setting it up so they go through every student to make sure every student is connected with an adult in that school. And this is an effort that takes a lot of time. That takes a lot of time for a staff to do that, but it makes a huge difference. So making sure they have an anchoring adult. I also wanted to say in Hartford, Vermont, there's a middle school teacher, guidance counselor, who has brought together a boys group. And he wasn't sure how it was going to go at first, but he got some kids with some social capital to join, kids who kind of needed it. So it started small. He is this incredible guy. And this group really took off. More people joined, incredible conversations. One of them made a short independent film about it. I'd love to connect you with him. He might be someone to be on the pod. And then the students are so moved by this that they're going off to high school. So they're going to start this boys group talking about these. It meets once a week, and it's taking away from their time, and what a difference that can make. Yeah,
the space for unstructured conversations,
right?
Where it's explicitly for, we don't talk about this enough, and hey, this conversation is for you. It's not graded, it's not mandatory. It's you show up and share, and it reminds me of the Ever Forward Club.
Ashanti Branch,
who was on, who's amazing, and that structure in schools is really powerful. All right, we're coming up on time. Okay. I want to make sure, is there anything else we covered a lot, but I want to make sure if there's something else you want to share, either new things you're working on that you want people to check out, or some, I don't know, message for hope or call to action, anything that we haven't covered that you think the audience needs to hear.
I mean, I would just say that, first of all, I'm seeing cultural change in the last 6 years. When I first started having conversations with school leaders about this topic, they could not get far enough away from me fast enough, and would say things like, "I'm so glad I don't have that problem in my school." And my response was, well, statistically speaking, that's unlikely. But the point is that they were so terrified. And that was also in the context of a time when educator sexual misconduct, historical sexual misconduct was really on the forefront in independent schools in particular. But I would say today, schools are coming to us and recognizing that, boy, we really need to get this down. And part of it is because they're seeing it tied in with wellness. And part of it also is that they recognize how much time and energy and money it takes to deal with these incidents.
Yeah.
And when they don't go well, it takes more time, more energy, and more money. And no one feels good about it. And so they're realizing like, oh, well, if I can actually do this work better, everyone, is going to come out better.
I think that proactive, what you're referring to, there is this shift that's happening that people, the fact that next week I'm speaking to 5th and 6th graders, I've never done that, 7th and 8th graders, this community, small community in Vermont, they want to educate kids ahead. And obviously I turn the volume way down, but I think parents after COVID recognizing that their kids were exposed to a lot of content that has been troubling for them. I think parents are surrendering a little bit. They're trusting schools more. They're allowing their kids to hear information that they hadn't in the past. I last night's film and Elizabeth Clement of Hidden Waters, the work they're doing, the people in her sphere, was so charged by everyone I met there.
Totally.
I mean, incredible people. And then there's another film coming out about Hotchkiss and their experience. Someone's doing a documentary film, and then including a middle school in the same community. So the fact that these films are talking about sexual abuse, and whether you're talking about sexual abuse, sexual assault, it all comes back to sexuality education, which needs to be proactive, early, often. It's awkward, it's painful, it's got to be done. It's not up to the school, it's up to the parents. And if the parents aren't going to do it, Planned Parenthood has an incredible program. There's also Our Whole Lives. There's great community programs that can happen. So,
and I would also just, give a gratuitous shout out to you for dedicating the time and energy, because again, like, the conversation is so important. Giving access, giving information to people, making it accessible is so important. So thank you for
I appreciate that.
hosting these.
I appreciate that. And Under the Hood Talk is totally part of the wave and the cohort. It's like this wouldn't exist if the conversation wasn't happening elsewhere too. And so same 6 years timeline that we've been doing this, totally was just swept up. And I don't know if I would be doing this alone. It would be hard. It'd be would anyone listen? Anyone care? So it's totally part of that momentum and wave too. But I'm so grateful for you both sharing, coming on, and also just grateful that I know you're out there in the world doing really good work. And I think it is very hopeful to hear the kind of the shift towards realizing that turning a blind eye and never talking about it doesn't put the problems away. They're just going to not have resources for mitigation and prevention. So it's better to turn towards these early and often, as you said, and give everyone the resources so that they're equipped. So that's a very hopeful change. And thank you both so much for being here. And
thank you.
Excited to share with everyone.
It was great to
Thank
be here.
you so much. So grateful to be here, and always love your work. Love what you're doing.
I do too.
Moving
Thanks so
the needle,
much.
sir.